Okay, hi. When I was in college, a neurophysiologist from UCLA visited our college, but not to give a lecture on neurophysiology, but to play the piano. So this man, whose name was Alan Schumann, was actually not only a neurophysiologist, but an accomplished pianist. And the message wasn't lost on me. I thought it was kind of interesting to find both those talents in one person. But it was even more interesting later on in my life when I was teaching bioethics, when I learned that Alan Schumann was both a member of the original Harvard committee to look into whether brain death was actually brain death, whether there could be a criteria that we could use to determine death using neurological criteria, and that later on in the 90s, he actually changed his mind and wrote a pretty controversial paper questioning the conclusions that he and his committee drew. And that, of course, brought a lot of attention to brain death. Here's one of the top leading experts in the country saying we were wrong, and brain death is not death. What did Schumann say? Well, here's a brief summary of the paper. The paper, I think, is available on the internet. I can certainly get you a copy if you want to look at it. He claimed in his paper that there was no central integrative organ of the human body. If you remember, this is one of the philosophical arguments for brain death, that life is about integration. We talked about the ability to integrate, and the brain is the integrator, and so you kick out the brain, you kick out integration, and that's a sign that you're dead. No, he gave some interesting evidence for this, but his main evidence was known cases of individuals who were declared brain dead, but who were placed on respirators and survived. Okay, so the theory is if you're brain dead, you can't do this for very long. Disintegration, as they say, starts happening pretty quickly, and you can only stave that off for so long with life support. But here we have a whole series of people ranging from a week to 23 years who survived brain death, apparently. Okay, so Jahi McMath is another example of this. Of course, Jahi McMath is later than this. This is in the 90s. Jahi McMath happened in 2013. And he also pointed out that their bodies did things that dead people don't do. And there's a list of things. So Grove went through puberty. The person who lived to 23 years went through puberty, eliminate body waste, and so forth. So this thing shouldn't be happening. Okay, so we're looking at kind of questions about brain death. There's two ways to question it. One way would be simply to argue that the definition is the wrong definition. Okay, the definition is incorrect. It's not a definition of brain death. The other way is to question the criteria, because remember, brain definitions of death now have two pieces to them. What is death? How do we tell it is? So you could argue that the testing criteria is wrong. And two things that occur to me here. Either the current means of how we test it is faulty. So even if we did it correctly, because people could make mistakes, but if we did it correctly, there's no guarantee that we found the thing that we're looking for. Or you could argue, and maybe in a more radical way, there is no way to verify whether somebody's brain, for example, is inoperable. Now, both of these could be explanations for longevity or for survival of brain death, that either the criteria were wrong, so we did the criteria correctly, but we didn't find what we were looking for, or the whole criteria or the whole definition itself could be wrong. So, as we've seen, some patients have continued to live. Oftentimes, as in the case of Jahi McMath, they never wake up, so they're maintained in some sort of, it look like they're asleep. Okay, some have woken up, and there's a couple examples of these. Zach Dunlap is a pretty recent example. There's another example too. I'll post these underneath here for you to look at if you want. Okay, and there's other people that have claimed in opposition to brain death that the whole definition itself was a hoax, that it was only created to facilitate organ donations and to cut medical costs for unproductive people. In 2008, the President's Council on Bioethics took up this issue. So obviously, that means it's a big issue. Okay, it's a question. It's not even though there's minority opposition, it's significant enough for the President's Council to take it up. And they sought to present the controversy fairly and to defend the definition. This is something that we can get on the internet. It's not going to go too much into. They talk about the physiology. They talk about the philosophy of it. They presented, and I don't think it's changed much since then. It's not been decided. Okay. So what should we do about this? Well, you can look at the evil piece that I asked you to look at. There's one argument there. It gets pretty involved, and I don't want to spend a lot of time at this point in the class looking at those arguments. I thought I would end this video talking about, well, what would be the point of doing all this? What would be the benefit to questioning the criteria? And a couple things occur to me. So you might simply say, well, it's to know the truth, okay, to get a better understanding of human death. And that's certainly a benefits us all. Care. There may be certainly better care of patients at the end of life. Certainly if we think somebody's dead, we're not caring for them very much. So we want to care for the patients that are alive and not care for the patients who are. Patients' rights. I think patients have a right, if they're alive, to be treated. So we would be violating their rights if we were wrong about brain death or about death in general. And then trust. And there's this issue of trust sitting around here. When someone claims that brain death itself is a hoax, that seems to suggest that we can't trust medical professionals. So transparency and trust would be another game. What would be the costs? Well, I thought about a couple things here. It would certainly be an impact on organ donations. And I'm not sure that this is correct anymore, but if brain death is the majority of ways we get organ donations, and we'll talk about organ donations later in the course, then not having as many brain dead or even not having any brain dead patients certainly would reduce the amount of organs available. If more people are alive than we think are alive, there certainly would be a strain on resources. There would be increased ICU demand and costs. If we were to change the definition now, there would certainly be legal challenges and legal things to do. We'd have to redefine death, and we'd have to get the law straightened out. And then finally, I was thinking there would be an impact on families. And this is not necessarily negative or positive, and I want to talk about this in the next video. So what do you think might be some of the other issues? Do you think I caught them all? Can you think of any yourself? Any other benefits or costs to questioning the status quo? And certainly brain death should be, after 50 years, considered the status quo.